We are following breaking news. Police in Maine have made an arrest in the mysterious murder case of paddleboarder Sunshine Stewart. We also now know what authorities say was her cause of death. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. We have a major update to tell you about in a story we've been following for the last 2 weeks that has put many in coastal small town Maine on edge. Maine State Police say they have made an arrest. They have taken a 17-year-old into custody in connection to the murder of Sunshine Stewart. At the time of this recording, we know that the suspect was taken into custody around 10:30 last night on July 16th without incident. Maine State Police have not released the suspect's name. They referred to him as a juvenile in their announcement. He is just 17 years old, and they say he's been transported to a youth facility, which is roughly an hour and a half away. It's called the Long Creek Youth Development Center. It is south of Portland, Maine. I'll get to the cause of death for Sunshine Stewart in just a moment, but there are some key pieces of information that led up to this arrest in the last couple of days. This story began on July 2nd when Sunshine's Sunny Stewart went out paddleboarding on Crawford Pond. She launched from a campsite on the north side of the pond. Police originally said that she left the campsite between 6 and 9 p.m. July 2nd, but she never returned. Friends have said that she was planning to spend the summer living at this campsite. She had rented a camper, and she had just been at the campsite for a couple of days prior to her death. Now, when she didn't return to the campsite on July 2nd after she went out paddleboarding, that is when law enforcement was called. They searched for several hours on Crawford Pond, and then around 1 o'clock in the morning, they say they found her body. Police say when they found the body of Sunshine Stewart, they called in the Major Crimes Unit of the State Police to investigate, and an autopsy confirmed that they were investigating a homicide. Yesterday, I spoke to Steve Betts, who's a longtime reporter in Maine. He's covered the area for more than 40 years. He said that this was the biggest mystery he has ever covered in this part of Maine. He works for an outlet called the Mid-Coast Villager. Betts said that he learned that police found Stewart's body on the south end of the island in the middle of the pond. It's called 100 Acre Island. It's run by a land trust and it's a nature preserve. He says that her body was found not too far from her paddleboard and her body was close to the water on the shore. Obviously, there are a ton of questions that we have at this point related to the arrest. At the time of this recording, we don't know if the suspect had any connection to Stewart, if he knew her prior to this attack, if he was staying on this island, what took place on this island. Again, there are so many questions that we just don't know the answers to in the hours after the announcement of this arrest. We did learn today what the cause of death was for this murder. Police say that Sunshine Stewart died of blunt force trauma and strangulation. It's unclear why police did not release the cause of death for the 2 weeks that they investigated this case. And we also learned from the Mid-Coast Villager that police had recently asked for the DNA of men in the area of Crawford Pond. It's unclear specifically how they honed in on this particular suspect who's now accused in the murder of Sunshine Stewart. This story, though, it has rocked this part of Maine. It is a place that typically doesn't see violent crime like this. It's a place where people often go to just get away, to enjoy the outdoors like Sunshine Stewart was. Many people live there full-time, but also a lot of people live there part-time just for the summer, or they go there on vacation. For as much as this story put a spotlight on this part of Maine, it's also important to keep a spotlight on the person that Sunshine Stewart was. Friends described her as an avid outdoorswoman. She had worked in the fishing industry. She had worked as a boat captain. Recently, she was working as a contractor. Her friends launched this GoFundMe that's raised more than $33,000 at the time of this recording to help with funeral expenses. Join us now to talk a little bit about this breaking news is retired NYPD Detective David Sarney. It's always great to have you on Law&Crime. What stands out to you with this arrest in the case of Sunshine Stewart?
Again, thank you for having me. It's a relief right now because what you're seeing is, I believe they're confident in the fact that the person they have in custody did commit this murder. They haven't put the charges out yet, but they did put the cause of death as strangulation and blunt force trauma. So it's beneficial on that end. If you look at it, you have hopefully some closure for the family and the friends having an arrest made on this. The prosecution will come later. But then you look at again the age of the person who's been arrested. He's 17, and this is becoming a problematic situation. I think nationally and maybe internationally, dealing with youth and violence, and you know how this person thought, whatever moment in time, to then strangle and hurt, injured, and blunt force trauma. So we're not sure how the blunt force trauma took place, maybe by a rock or some other instrument he had in his possession at the time. But it's a benefit that they have a person in custody. And you can see right now they're becoming more open in the investigation because they're explaining, how Sonny was murdered.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about the cause of death in a moment, but 17 years old is a suspect. At the time we're recording this, we don't know their name. They've been taken to a juvenile detention center, which is about an hour and a half away near Portland, Maine. Um, how likely is it that we'll learn the name of this suspect?
From my understanding, the way Maine operates is when he gets his first court appearance, they'll release the name. We've seen that in the past with other, each state is different in the way they handle juvenile arrests for felony crimes. And Maine, I believe, is on that line where they want to maintain the person's name out of the media until the first appearance, and you'll probably see that name come out at that point. And you may also see further explanation as to the apprehension and arrest of this 17-year-old.
Yeah, and few pieces of information coming out from Maine State Police. I mean, certainly some big pieces of information, but said it was, I guess they were cooperative when they were arrested. Were brought into custody without incident. David, I think about how this all played out, and you have this woman who goes out paddleboarding in quiet coastal Maine on a pond around the 4th of July. I mean, it's the type of place that it's cliche to say it doesn't happen here, but it does seem like a place that you just wouldn't expect it. When you hear the cause of death being blunt force trauma and strangulation, in your experience, typically, what does that tell you about how this crime happened?
It was violent. I mean, that's really the end result. Is there's a violence to this to Sonny's death, and to a murder at this point, and that's what you can see. I mean, the moment we don't know, we know she left at a certain time, and they recovered body several hours later. You're looking at what the time frame was. Apparently, the 17-year-old's family would actually be in the area, was vacation in the campground area, so there is some familiarity with the area. Whether or not there's a relationship between Sonny and this 17-year-old is speculative at this point. But the violence to her is what caused that violence. What was the interaction with Sonny and this defendant at that moment in that pond area? I mean, the paddleboard was still there at the scene. Was he on the and were they paddleboarding together? Was there something that happened? Did he just approach her? The violence again sticks out because what made that interaction violent? And we could speculate because apparently they were looking for DNA samples from males in the area. So I don't want to say anything because obviously I'm not part of that investigation, but I could understand they're looking at a male for a particular reason. And I guess the unusual circumstances in which Sonny's body was found may have led to the fact they believed it was a male involved.
What do you make of it? Was about 2 weeks from July 3rd when her body was found around 1 o'clock in the morning to last night around 10:30. I guess this arrest was made. People, understandably, people who lived in Maine were on edge because there wasn't a lot of information being released. And as far as murder investigations go, what do you make of the time it took to make this arrest?
I always say that we would wish these investigations would be faster, but they can't. You have to really take a step-by-step process to this. We don't paint these investigations with a broad brush. We go with scalpels. We actually have to make sure we have everything that we have down. Back in the day, we used to use an easel, and we'd have everything down on that easel and put down what were things that were done and what needs to be done. And we've seen investigations go on for extensive periods of time because of that. And really, the prosecution needs more evidence because that's what it comes down to. We want to make sure that everything is done in the process to find out what the truth of what happened to Sonny. And that's why I think the investigation took that long, because you want to make sure that nothing is missed. So there could be nothing to say that the person that we have arrested is not the person that committed the crime. And I always want to make sure, and I believe this full-heartedly, we don't arrest people just to arrest them. We want to arrest them because they committed that crime. And that's what we're seeing here is they have enough evidence, enough probable cause to arrest the 17-year-old based on the evidence they had available to them. And I guarantee you they talked to the prosecution and said, yes, there's enough. We can make the arrest based on that. And now it's going to be up to the courts to determine whether or not he's going to be tried as a juvenile or as an adult and how it goes from there.
I know it varies from state to state, but often you do see in a lot of the cases that we cover, if someone's 16 or older, I feel like, and it's a charge like murder, and he hasn't been officially charged yet, but he's 17. If this was going to be a murder case or a trial, presumably it would be when he was 18 years old. What's typically the bar that someone goes from being a juvenile to then being considered by the system as an adult?
Well, it's based on state law. Like New York had juveniles at one point. You were an adult at 16 in New York State as far as arrests were concerned. So once you were arrested, you were going to be tried as an adult. And that's one thing we see in a lot of states. We've raised the age where the culpability is now under the age, until you're 18, you're a juvenile. So we've raised the age on that part. But as far as the crime standards are concerned, if you correct, the way it was in New York, if the person was arrested at committed the crime at 16 and you arrested at the age of 18, you could only hold him for the crime based on him being 16 at that time of the crime. So then he would have to be tried in family court. This will take a little time, but they're going to base it on the incident, the time of the incident, which is he's now 17. I don't know the birth date of this person, how far the trial is going to be. There could be a plea arrangement, a plea bargain at this point. We'll see what happens, what the defense will do, and what the prosecution will offer. Or they don't have to offer any plea at this point, because if they believe they have enough evidence, they'll take this to trial and have a jury determine whether or not that the 17-year-old that you've accused, and again, understand the criminal justice system, you're innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. No matter when police make an arrest, we're basing a probable cause. I'm very adamant about this. I teach this to my students all the time. You can make an arrest, but if that person is not convicted beyond a reasonable doubt, they're considered innocent in the court of the criminal justice system. The court of public opinion may say otherwise, but right now, you have enough to make this arrest. Whether or not he's going to be, prosecuted as an adult will be based on what the prosecution determines can push that case to make it an adult murder case.
Why not release the cause of death until today if you were the Maine State Police?
I think reality is this is a small area and it's a confined area where Sonny was murdered. If you released it, you might have given an opportunity for someone to flee, someone to, do people actually make false confessions and say, I'm the person that did it for attention? That's a possibility too. So a lot of times you want to keep everything tight. And I believe investigations, especially murder investigations in small towns, you can have public speculation and you can have the media say this and happened, but we have to hold on to the truth and the facts available at that time. They did the search. They found Sonny's body. They saw her under unusual circumstances, which they want to then say it's a homicide based on the ME's report. That's what they kept to. And they always kept to that. We want to keep the truth to get away from people making things up. And we want to make sure that everything that the investigation has is as I can say, as sterile as possible. So we don't have that biases coming in. And that's what investigators do. As investigators, and the basic thing about investigations are, as a detective, you have to have an unbiased opinion and stick to the facts of the case. You may be upset about the case, but you have to stick to what the case is and what the investigation entails.
What type of access does law enforcement now? They've taken the 17-year-old into custody. They say without incident. He's now at this juvenile detention facility. What type of access do investigators now have as they're trying to figure out what happened?
Well, that's the next step of it, because anytime you make an arrest doesn't mean the investigation's over. They were looking for DNA samples. Did they retrieve DNA from the suspect, from the defendant in this case? Right now he's the defendant. Are they retrieving that? Do they have to get a court order for that? These are things that are coming into play, because if they were looking for DNA from the scene and they didn't get DNA from him at the time they made this arrest, or they did, we don't really know if he actually volunteered it or whatever. But these are things now you're going to have to wait for the forensic aspects of this case. Did he actually make statements? Did he make omissions of the incident? Were there video And now you have a person in custody. Now we're going to look to all the videos that you might have been able to get and anything that could trace him to back to that scene of the crime. And that's what you're looking for. You want to make sure that you make this, you kind of tie this up into a nice bow. So when the prosecution goes to trial, they have everything available to them to follow up on the prosecution.
And this next question, it's a morbid one, but since we've learned the cause of death, I think it's important to talk about blunt force trauma. I think a lot of us have a basic understanding of what that means just because of the name itself. But from a legal perspective, as a police officer, what is blunt force trauma?
Blunt force trauma is injury sustained to the person by means where they can cause a serious contusion, or in this case, we don't know how the condition of Sonny's body at the time, so we don't know how hard the blunt force trauma is, and that's why when they spoke, they ruled out accidental, they ruled out suicide, because based on the injuries on Sonny's body, they saw enough to believe that this was a person who did this to her. It wasn't done by accident or done by herself. So how severe the blunt force trauma is, that's why anytime we do these investigations take place, crime scene will get there. They will take photos of every aspect of Sonny at that point at the scene. And then the autopsy takes place afterwards. And that's where they're going to determine, we can speculate at the scene that this looks like a murder or this looks like a homicide, but then the ME can determine it based on the facts gathered by the detectives, injuries sustained by the victims. What type of death was this? How did this person die? And in this case, it's a homicide, death by another.
And we don't know anything about this suspect other than the fact that they're 17 years old and they were taken into custody without incident and the cause of death, and assuming that they're the person accused of causing that cause of death. But I just think about, to your point, of just how violent it seems that this was, and to do this to someone who just goes out paddleboarding in a quiet spot. And we'll learn more about this person's background, but I just don't get the sense. I mean, that someone has just done this for the first time. Like, what is the profile of people in your experience who do things like what this person is presumably accused of doing?
Well, that's the thing. A lot of times you can see people who have committed crimes in the past who elevate their type of criminality. We don't know where this person stands. We don't know his life story, his relationship with his family, his relationship on social media, his relationship with others, classmates, friends, and the like, if he has friends at all. But we're seeing this, unfortunately, this lashing out of juveniles on a regular basis. We see violent crime. New York City crime is down, but juvenile crime, violent crimes for people at that age are up, and that's a concerning factor. This isn't just a localized New York City problem. We're seeing kids around this city, this state, this country doing violent acts. And that's something we have to really, that's another discussion for another time period in education systems and the like. But this 17-year-old had enough rage that he took a person that Sonny seemed to be, was loved by everyone she dealt with. And at that moment in time decided, I'm going to not only hurt her, I'm going to strangle her, and I'm going to bash her in. However the injuries took place, bashed her, and these are things you have to, it's horrible to say, but when as an investigator, I take all of that prejudice out. We're like, bashing is like, we're saying, no, she was struck seriously. Either she was grabbed to the ground, struck on the ground, struck with an item, an object. We don't know because we don't have every bit of information. But as a detective, we look at and go, we may say her brains are bashed in. And I'm not saying that's happened to Sonny, but we can say, oh, he got the daylights beat out of him. And photos will do that. But what the factors are, and that's why blunt force trauma is done by the ME's office. We can say bashed, crashed, punched, kicked, stabbed. They have a more medical terminology, and that's fine. But, this is something, this was a happenstance, it seems. I don't know if she arranged to go with this person, the 17-year-old. He was at the scene, and that interaction just turned extremely violent on his part.
And I think, too, of the investigators on this and perhaps a sense of relief that they have, because, I mean, if you work, in Maine and this is the story that has taken over this area and it's your job to be the person to find it, to reach that point where in your mind that you found the person that did it, what is that moment like? as a police officer, because we often will see body camera video of an arrest, and that moment is very public. But what is the moment you and your team, and you reach the point where you say, I think this is the person who did it and we have to arrest them?
We've seen that, and there is a relief to that, and that's a benefit, because now here, you may not realize this, but that's just the tip of it, because now it's just tip of the iceberg. Because we make the arrest, we have to still develop enough evidence to then create that beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's the thing. The investigation may be considered over. You have a person in custody. In New York City, the NYPD calls it an A1. It's an arrest, but it doesn't end there. And the investigators involved in this, there may be a limited amount of resources and limited amount of investigators involved at this point, where you might have a dozen, you lower it a little bit more. And that still continues. That investigation still continues, because you have to make sure the prosecutor's going to see everything and say, okay, did we have this? Do we have this? Because now that's the next part of it. The arrest is there. We still have to continue, because we're going to the prosecution now. This is going to be in the prosecutor's hands. Did we give the prosecution enough to say the person we arrested isn't what we believe to be, but beyond a reasonable doubt did what he did and what he's accused of? And that's what the investigators continue to do. It may be a more limited basis with resources, but the reality is you're still going to do the work.
And we'll see how this plays out. Major development in this case today out of Maine. Retired NYPD Detective David Sarney, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much. Stay safe.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.